venues around the United Kingdom that have declared that they're not going to have vaccine passports. Of which Dan Davis has been a very important part of that, and from day one he's been an absolute stalwart. As you'll know, and I'm going to talk a bit more about Dan in a minute, but he's chairman of the Institute of Licensing, which is comprised of licensing officers who related to environmental health officers, as well as police officers. And for him to take such an amazing stand right from the start has been incredible. A big round of applause for Dan. And we're here at this amazing venue, the anti-supermarket supermarket. And I think it's a real testament. I mean, I don't know if the audience that are watching this live can see, because the lights, but we've got a packed house. I was here at 6 o'clock and at 6:30 thinking, a bit like when I was in Cardiff on Tuesday, thinking we're not going to have anyone here, what's going on? Dan's like, don't worry, no, it's all sorted. And we've got a packed house, it's fantastic, in the Wirral here in New Brighton, a really exciting development, a brilliant example of regeneration. And so everyone that's watching on the live stream, you should know that it's great to have you with us. But this is a packed house. There's people even standing at the back. If you can find some additional spaces, please do. So we called this panel to discuss something very, very serious and very important. Can there be science of any kind without free speech? And you might think it's a one-word answer, but what we'd like to do this evening is interrogate that question some more with some really, really good speakers, and more importantly, actually, with you guys, because one of the issues that's happened in the last 20 months, but is not just specific to COVID and the lockdown response, has been treating the public with contempt and disdain, and not engaging with the public, not engaging with us, but just, imposing things, telling us things. Remember when we first started this situation, there was a huge amount of people in Britain who came out, who volunteered, who wanted to do things to help. And that sense of being volunteering and being robust and wanting to help quickly got suffocated and became a kind of, we're going to regulate, we're going to tell you, and this is what it's going to be. And it's really, really problematic in our opinion. What we need is to have a robust discussion with the public. People take responsibility. For the most part, people are really decent. They're our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues. And it's in that spirit we want to look at this question tonight and discuss it. And it's a free speech, open debate, but it is civil discussion, right? So it's not about name calling. We've seen enough of that, right? Calling people things, stupid, sheeple, co-idiots, whatever it might be. What we want to do is have an open, honest discussion. And once we get off the panel, we're going to be quite short introductions from some brilliant speakers. We're going to come out to you guys. There'll be a mic at the front. And where it's being live streamed over there with Jamie, you'll be standing there. You can ask questions or you can make comments and points. And we want to take around a few of them and then come back to the panel and then come back out to you guys, because we do want a public debate and discussion. We think that a lot of people in Britain are furious at what's happening right now, and we haven't had our voices heard. So, just before, what's going to happen is we're going to have a video presentation and we're going to have a Zoom around the speakers. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce everyone, and I'm going to say a few words as well before we get to see all of that. But firstly, I want to kind of hand over to Dan Davis to say a few words. I really, I was involved in I should say firstly that actually I went to Liverpool University, and it's like in my heart and blood, and I love the whole of Merseyside, and it's incredible to be back in a packed room. So I feel very, very grateful to that. But seeing the regeneration project that Dan has done, and where he sold his company and put everything on the line and is constantly struggling with the council and everything, it's just a testament to this guy's character. And I'm really proud to be sitting on a stage next to him with all the remarkable work he's doing. And he's constantly been an advocate for the togetherdeclaration.org, which at the moment we've got 123,000 signatures, which says the public, professionals, campaigners, MPs, a range of people from around the UK have all signed it. We'd love all of you to sign it. Get your phones out, sign the togetherdeclaration.org. We'd also like you to post from here on Facebook, on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. Hashtag Together Declaration, free speech, take photos, tell people that you're here, and to sign the togetherdeclaration.org, please. So now I'm going to hand over to Dan Davis. Let's have a big, huge, warm welcome for Mr. Dan Davis.
Hi guys, thanks a million for coming out tonight. I think this demonstrates exactly, the appetite people have for having some information, and also perhaps a different narrative than the one that's peddled to you by the BBC, Sky, and a load of the mainstream channels. Because, some people have said, well, the speakers tonight are, weighted towards sort of a skeptic, sort of view of X, Y, and Z. And yeah, they are. And that's, if you want the alternative point of view, and we want to have a discussion. But if you want it every day of the week, just turn on any major news channel, because all they're doing is pushing a narrative. And if you follow the money, look at who they're owned by. It's all interlinked. Now, I've had the vaccines. I had the first two, mainly because my mother and father were ill with cancer. And to start with, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a conspiracy theorist per se. But what I've witnessed in the last couple of years is something that if we don't stand up, I just think the very fabric of our democracy is getting just eroded right in front of our eyes. I was born in 1973, and I did a newspaper around these streets. I grew up around these streets, watching an area like New Brighton completely just go to rack and ruin. There's thousands of New Brightons in this country, and they get written off by councils who couldn't care less, and a government that thinks the north is like Islington. And so thank you for coming here. The building we're sat in is a purpose-built quick save. It's been quick save, it's been Summerfield, it's been Co-op, and it's been Budgeons. Each one failed, and then it was boarded up for 7 years. We've got 3 banks on the road with no banks there now. We've got a bus stop that no buses stop at. And 3.5 years ago, every single property that was, apart from a few that were hanging in there, were boarded up. Now, we've had such a change in the last couple of years. We've been locked down, we've been battered, we've been bruised, but there's a lot of people who just want an alternative viewpoint as well, and just to look at some of the facts. Because the companies that are pushing a lot of the agenda that's today are well financed, they're global companies, they're interlinked, and the position we're in, you've got to be able to listen to an alternative viewpoint, and one that is logical, you can back up with facts, and often doesn't get the sort of platform it deserves. The real thanks is to people like Alan, who is literally dedicated 24 hours a day to getting not only the Together movement up and running, but he's the founder of the Nighttime Industry Association. He was responsible for putting night czars around the country, following Malik Milan in Amsterdam and in Berlin, and he got them in New York. He lives between London and New York, and he's an absolute legend. And the other person who's sat next to me is Craig, who's come over from Canada. He's originally from around here. And he went, I'll let him tell his story later, but what his story is a bit of a sort of a view of what the future potentially could look like. I'm going to pass back to Al. But thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, Dan. And yeah, as Dan said, we're going to have Craig Lee Williams speaking in a little while. I'm going to just tell you a little bit, very short intros to the speakers, and then I'm going to say a few words and then hand over to them. If you want to look at their biographies, they're really, really impressive. So we're going to have a video from Dr. Renee Herdenkram, who's an NHS doctor. She writes and appears regularly on the news around questions of health and policy. And then we're going to have Dr. Claire Craig, who's a diagnostic pathologist. And I should say that Claire has stepped in at a very, very short notice, and we're really, really grateful for it to have someone of her eminence joining us this evening. And we've also got Dr. Jade Norris, and Jade is a research associate at the University of Bristol. And we're going to be hearing from them about their views and thoughts on this question, and then also from Craig about his experience in Canada and reflections on coming back. So just before the video, I wanted to say a few words about why we think this subject is just really so important. Every new scientific idea is met with offence, consternation, objections, and sometimes obstruction. And while we know famous historical examples, such as the banning of Copernicus's publication by the Catholic Church a long time ago, and Galileo being hauled in front of the Roman Inquisition hearings, there have been many well-catalogued examples, old and new, where free speech and science have been suffocated together. We've been brought up generally with Charles Darwin's groundbreaking theory of evolution, a work that posed enormous challenge to religious sentiments before becoming accepted. It was highly and hotly debated and argued over, as it should be, in public with famous papers, written speeches made for and against. We think of ourselves as modern and scientific now, but in 1984, Barry Marshall drank a petri dish of H. pylori culture, which was then cured with antibiotics to disprove the stress theory of stomach aches. Now, many ignored him and ridiculed him and refuted the work, but in 2005, 2 decades later, and a further decade from when he first started saying it, he achieved the Nobel Prize. And the point about all of this is that scientific inquiry obviously invokes very strong reactions, whether it's stem cell research and genetics, debates around bioethics, sexual health, genetically modified food development, and a range of other areas. These debates and discussions publicly are vital and should never be suffocated. That is different, of course, to the actual scientific inquiry, the research and testing and publications with peer review. Although we should note that the climate in which science can be pursued is very much influenced by the political and cultural mores or fashions that inform society at any particular time. This was as true in more brutal forms of society that we can all, well, some of us who are as old as me can remember, where the science had to match up to instrumental political ideas to devastating cost, similarly as it can be today. Now, I think that we should use Neil deGrasse Tyson's outlook on science, and he says, science needs the light of free expression to flourish. It depends on the fearless questioning of authority and the open exchange of ideas. So tonight the question we're asking is, to what extent can we have science without free speech? Controversies are not new, from the furious discussions about the MMR vaccination, where once we know the media took up Andrew Wakefield's position that it had a causal relationship to autism, subsequently it wanted to pillory him. Also questions around the thalidomide scandal. However, what is new is that we have had lockdowns around the globe simultaneously, along with other restrictions that have consistently done things claiming the name of the science. Now, when government ministers presented the reasons for policy decisions such as lockdowns and restrictions and things like vaccine passports, that's where everyone's going to go boo, they did it on the basis of saying we're following the science. And we've heard terms such as the science says, or when people want to make their arguments sound more compelling, they say things like the evidence says. But is there really such a thing as the science? Or is that more that, is it more that science is a method of rigorous research and inquiry? What we choose to do about any particular piece of evidence is what's actually called politics. That's one of the reasons it's important to have this debate today, and the other, of course, is how much free speech is essential to science. In the trial of Socrates, Socrates is sentenced to death for asking simple questions of students and leaders. He was accused of failing to acknowledge the gods that the city acknowledges and introducing new deities. Now, people have been presented as heretics for asking questions and challenging in most historical periods, but asking questions in public is surely an important contribution to science, to inquiry and to knowledge. So a few things for you to think about as we turn over to the speakers, considering this question. Is the question to what extent something like Ofcom, the broadcast regulator for UK media, should caution or impede the media when putting on speakers with views that challenge or contradict public health figures and the government? Should public health announcements not be susceptible to rigorous challenge? Have we had that during this time? And rather than some online debates with nasty terms and people being taken down, what we actually need is a proper open discussion where everyone can engage. So, without further ado, I've got much more to say on this, like I'm sure you all do, but I'm going to ask to see the video from Dr. Renee Herdenkamp, please.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for coming along today, and I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you in person. I'm about to give you a whistle-stop tour of why freedom of speech is important in science, if it is important. So let me start with one of our greatest scientists ever, Albert Einstein, who said that science can only flourish in an atmosphere of free speech. So we have it from the words of the greatest scientist ever. So why is free speech so important to science? Well, I think it's a good place to start, to just think about what science is. Science is a method of putting forward a hypothesis, which is then tested and challenged, and if necessary, replaced with a new hypothesis. So it's constantly changing. One idea is never right, it's just there to be challenged and replaced with a better idea. It was right this week, but not necessarily next week. And we can only do that if we have free speech. So, for example, in the Middle Ages, scientists were absolutely convinced for a very long time that disease came from bad smells. And only when that idea was challenged vigorously with scientists who discovered microbes did we then go on to discover that disease was caused by viruses, parasites and bacteria. Had they not challenged the main idea, the orthodoxy, the ideology as it was then, we would still be living in the dark ages and most of us would be dying well before the age that I am today. So freedom of speech was essential then as it is now. Alongside that is transparency. Transparency is key to good science. So freedom of speech and transparency are ideal bedfellows. They sit comfortably side by side. With freedom of speech allowing us to contest and challenge, learn, criticise from other ideas, then we have to do that with transparency, because transparency allows us to know that we are getting all of the information that we need in order to challenge it. If we don't have the information, how can we challenge it and form new ideas and new answers to complex problems? How can we have scientific rigour if we are not told everything that we need to know? If we are then told what we can say and what we can't say, or worse still, if the information is actually hidden from us deliberately. These things are happening now. And as George Orwell said, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to say things that you don't want to hear. And that's how you challenge a scientific idea. If it was my idea that you were challenging, I might not want you to challenge it or replace it. I might not want to hear your idea, but I'm afraid I have to, because that's the way that science works. And everything circles back to freedom of speech, because you need that to do that. So what do we have today? Well, freedom of speech in science has been under attack for quite some time, decades in fact. I found in 2018 an event that was entitled The Importance of Free Speech in Science, and the event was cancelled because the university deemed that the event was too high risk. And that's where we are in our learned places with our brightest minds. We are protecting them from things that they might not want to hear. We are doing the exact opposite of what we need to do in science. And if these young people can't be challenged in university, how can they learn to come out in society as scientists and do exactly what they were protected from? Challenge ideas, say things to people that they don't want to hear. This deplatforming is going on daily in our universities. So looking specifically and very quickly at COVID, Ofcom made sure at the beginning of this pandemic back in March that the mainstream media were not allowed to say anything that went against the government line, the government narrative, the PHE messaging. It was very clear that fines and punishment would be dealt to mainstream media if they did this. So we have seen this. Hours and hours of Neil Ferguson, who's never got anything right, still continues on mainstream media. But anybody considered an outlier, people like Professor Carl Henderson, evidence-based medicine editor at Oxford University, is an outlier apparently and not given media time. Social media on every platform takes down posts, marks them as misleading, puts banners on to take people to proper information about COVID, which means government information. YouTube videos are taken down. Scientific journals will accept preprints all of the time that are not peer-reviewed. But when they're given peer-reviewed data that doesn't marry with the narrative, they don't run them. This has just happened to Dr. Robert McCulloch on a paper he had peer-reviewed for myocarditis, accepted and then withdrawn. The B&J has just run a hit piece on some of our most eminent professors in this country and the States, calling them anti-science for authoring the Great Barrington Declaration. The censoring and the really besmirching of our greatest scientists continues everywhere. So where are we today? We are grooming the science to fit the narrative. That lots of research and ideas are being put forward, but the media and our scientific journals are selecting what we can and can't see. Personal interest and financial gain is at the heart of everything. Conflicts of interest are only coming to light when they're leaked in emails or they're exposed inadvertently. They're not being declared as ordinarily they always would be. The shutting down of uncomfortable truths is going on day in and day out. And basically, if it doesn't fit the message, it won't go out. So freedom of speech, we don't have it. There is no debate any longer. Freedom of speech has been gagged. Information is being filtered by people who do not have our best interests at heart. The true meaning of science has gone. And at a moment in history when we actually need this scientific inquiry through freedom of speech, scientists and doctors, in many cases, appear to have lost their ethical and moral compass. Let's hope, people, that it doesn't stay that way, because where we are at the moment is not healthy for science, and it isn't advancing any new ideology. I hope that's been interesting. I know it was a whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure you have lots of other speakers adding to it today as well on the panel. Have fun, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in today. I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you.
So now we're going to hear from Dr. Claire Craig, who's with us. Claire, over to you, please. You've got to take your mute off. Let's get you.
Thank you very much for having me, Alan, and everybody who's there. I'm very sorry that I'm not there with you in person. I just wanted to share a few thoughts about science and free speech, and then a little bit about what's happened to me personally. So the way I see it is there are three things that you need in order to be able to carry out scientific inquiry. The first is curiosity. You have to believe that we don't know everything yet. The second is an acceptance that some of the things that you do believe are wrong. And the third is a willingness to accept new ideas. And what all three of those really encompass is an element of humility, which is really, really lacking at the moment. And what those things also clash with is both politics and also institutions. It's a really bad fit for any institution to have humility, to be open to new ideas, and to be willing to be wrong. And it was Max Planck at the turn of the century who said, science progresses one funeral at a time. That was kind of interesting, that idea, because at the time in Victorian Britain, science was progressing massively. It was really progressing massively because they had a culture of institutions where there were conflicting ideas. They were very open to debate. And it progressed one funeral at a time because when somebody died, there was someone else with an opposing view ready to take over. That hasn't been the case for years and years because the people who succeed in the institutions are the political players who rise up the ranks and who are all conformists. The rebels and the people who kind of have new ideas and want to try out new things are kind of excluded from the culture of the institutions in science at the moment. And just to go back to Victorian times, it's worth remembering that they had these incredible breakthroughs around electromagnetism, around evolution, around dinosaurs, germ theory, quantum physics, really, really major breakthroughs. But those breakthroughs only happened because at that time, people were able to hold views that were quite extraordinary. People in society, famous people would held some very odd views around, say, magnetism or hypnotism or the ether, things that were discredited later, or rather were taken over by other ideas later. But it was fine to try them out. And we don't no longer let people try out ideas that are a bit wacky. But the other ones that were right were a bit wacky at the time as well. And it's only by accepting slightly wacky ideas that you're going to be able to find the ones that are right. So on to politics. The political world has no room for humility. In politics, you need to know everything. And anyone that proves you're wrong about something is a threat to your power. So science and politics are actually opposites, really. And in public health, they come together, and in a crisis like this, it's a disaster for science because politics is the opposite of what we need for science. And I think part of that, really, you'd hope would be some willingness, some forgiveness, some an ability to let politicians say that they've got things wrong. But it's the politicians that need to make that move. We can't make that move for them. I think actually this situation is so crazy that there would be room for a certain amount of forgiveness if they took some steps in that direction. But they're just too scared to do it because historically in politics, if you're wrong, you're out. And so they've got the situation where they're trying to cling to power. And so they want rid of anybody that might show them that they're wrong about anything. And they've gone about that through censorship and trying to undermine and discredit people, which is what happened to me. So back in January, in fact, right through I first started speaking publicly a year ago in September. And I published on how over the summer, the data looked like we were over-diagnosing COVID, and that the patients who were being called COVID patients in hospital were probably all the result of false positive results. And there's a lot of evidence to back that up. And as time's gone on, more and more evidence has come forward to back that up. And I took that theory a bit too far in the autumn. And I still think that in the autumn of last year, a huge number of the apparent COVID diagnoses were incorrect, but it wasn't as many as I claimed. And so there was an attempt to take me down on the basis of that, but also on the basis of all sorts of other things that I've said, which now are mainstream. So I was saying that it was a seasonal virus, and I think everybody accepts that now. We have the governor of California saying that yesterday. I was saying that T-cell immunity played a role as well as antibody immunity. And so the reason that we saw the curve in spring hit a peak and fall in a mathematically completely predictable way with constant deceleration of growth is not because of changes in behaviour. Changes in behaviour should have changed it in a way that there would be a deceleration that would change over time because of the change in behaviour. But what we actually saw was predictable from the beginning as the susceptible population shrank in size. It's actually a fairly simple idea. And the susceptible population shrinks in size when it wasn't all of us in the first place, because only a proportion of us was susceptible in the first place. And those ideas are mainstream now, but at the time they were wrong. And because they were considered to be wrong, the way that they tried to discredit me was to say, look what she's saying. There was never, look what she's saying and she's wrong because of X, Y, and Z. That didn't come into it at all. And they didn't feel the need to do that because everyone else was in this cultish belief about what was true. So that if somebody says something else, you can just say, look what she's saying. And that was enough to discredit me. It's really very, very strange. I was looking back over it today and I stand by practically all the things that they were trying to use to pull me down. Just to say that I've also been censored. I've had YouTube videos removed. I had Twitter, hide tweets and call them sensitive. There was one tweet where I was sharing a laboratory protocol from Germany for the PCR test. It was very dull, and it was censored as sensitive content. And actually today, the Cochrane collaboration was censored by Instagram. Now, the Cochrane collaboration are a British institute who try to bring together all the medical evidence so that we can get to what the truth is. So what they do is, instead of sort of doing research, they look at all the research that's been done. They go and hunt out all the research that was done but never published, because often there's a bit of a bias in what gets into the publications. You know, if you get results that didn't show anything, they're much less likely to get published. They find all of that as well, bring it together and work out across all of it where the truth lies and publish that. So they are the kind of arbiters of the truth. And they were censored by Instagram as being fake news or, you know, untrue. It was really, really ridiculous when it gets to that stage. And what the situation that we have now is that you may be aware of, you know, a few characters and a few people who are speaking out, who put their careers on the line. What you won't be aware of is the silent army of people behind us who are so threatened by the culture that we're in, by risking their careers. You know, they don't feel that they could ever speak out, but they are on our side and they're helping and they're contributing, but silently, because that is where we're at. People are too frightened to say what they think, and that's an awful state of affairs where we mustn't let it continue.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. Claire raised a lot of really important questions there that I think we're all going to want to come back and discuss. And now Jade Norris, please.
Thank you so much to Alan and the team for inviting me to join this panel today. As I'm a researcher at a university, I'm going to focus on the importance of free speech, debate and inquiry in academia. Universities are the places where some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs happen. In recent years, universities have also increased their focus on creating what is termed the impact of research, so that is the real world change that can be brought about by the research findings. Looking at the issue of freedom of speech, debate and inquiry within our universities is crucial, as what happens within these institutions ultimately affects us all. I'm currently working on a clinical trial, and a crucial part of ensuring that the findings of clinical trials are robust is to minimise what is termed bias. Bias can be introduced into a trial at any time, as the trial is being designed, as the data is analysed, or as the findings are being published. Several steps are taken to minimise this bias. For example, in many trials, we use something called blinding, which means that if, for example, people in the trial are allocated to take either a placebo or an active medication, neither they nor the researchers will know which medication that they're taking. Blinding reduces bias because people's perceptions about the relative effectiveness of each medication can't bias the results of the trial if people don't actually know which they're taking. I'm giving this example because I think that bias is a useful lens through which to look at the issue of freedom of speech and inquiry in academia. I think a very current form of bias that many of us are experiencing stems from the feeling that argument, a vital component of science, is being systematically moralised, and almost a feeling of a kind of new puritanism on many factors, which some have felt as a suggestion that you should be quite happy with having less for the good of insert your crisis here. It's not gone unnoticed that some of the loudest proponents of the need for us to accept having less and less and to spend more and more come from those who, on the whole, already have plenty. I think that the moralising of so many different arguments has been eroding debate for years. I noticed it in particular during the Brexit referendum when I was working at another university. To Brexit was the morally incorrect thing to do, and so it was frowned upon and not acknowledged as a choice in the run-up to a vote which clearly had two options. On the morning after the vote, I was quite astounded by the horrible way in which many academics spoke about their fellow humans who just happened to have a different opinion to them and had used their democratic right to voice this. Of course, they must be stupid, evil, immoral, and clearly misled by more powerful but equally stupid, evil, and immoral politicians. It wasn't even on their radar that they themselves could possibly have come to their opinion about this issue through the very same methods. So working nicely alongside moralising the argument is this demonization of opposes, as Claire talked about. Many of us have seen this recently in the way that academics and scientists who have expressed concerns about lockdowns and other non-pharmaceutical interventions, or NPIs, for the COVID pandemic have been treated. Clearly, there are many harms of NPIs, some of which will not be seen for decades to come, but will have been predicted by many. So we have to ask ourselves why questioning voices were so ferociously shut down. And I think Laura Dodsworth's work on the fear campaign used by our government sums this up nicely. But for the progression of science, the danger of this situation is that it is causing a silence, which interactions on social media only serve to amplify. Only the loudest join platforms like Twitter, and usually they are those who are quite happy with the status quo. When dissenting voices are silent, the perception is that this is just what everybody thinks, which in turn leads to more staying silent, and the spiral continues. The pressures on free speech at universities are therefore multifaceted. There is significant pressure to toe certain lines to get a permanent job, to attract research funding from funding bodies with their own agendas, and there's also the very real threat of being cancelled by students, some of who now, fueled by the actions of the universities, view themselves as consumers who pay your wages, a phrase which has been received with a groan from the police for some time, but seems to be quite encouraged in higher education. We've seen the extent to which this is not only stifling speech, but making people who simply want to pursue their academic research feel that this is no longer tenable for them. This ultimately reduces the things that can be researched because they are viewed from the lens of whether they are the right thing to be researching. As Alan mentioned, the framing of scientific research as the science over the past 18 months or so, as opposed to the process of science, has entrenched this problem by making things unquestionable. It's got to the point that any questioning of authority, which used to be the kind of position championed by most academics, is often now seen as a form of aggression. So when students and staff cannot engage in a genuinely open and free debate, including about the pros and cons of shutting people in their houses for months on end, we really are in trouble. A recent interesting example is COVID status certification, and that's the reason that many of us know of the Together campaign and why a lot of us are here tonight. Prominent members of the scientific community, including some senior members of Independence Age, wrote to the British Medical Journal some months ago about the perils of COVID status passports. They argued against their use in the UK, citing the dangers of coercion in reducing trust in science and the medical professions, and entrenching existing inequalities in society. But since this argument started hotting up again in recent months, it have gone awfully quiet. And this would indeed suggest that you can just choose the hot topic of the moment to be moralised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. So I've got a question for both Claire and Jade, and then we're going to come out to you guys, then we're going to come back, and then I'm going to ask Craig to say some words, and we're going to keep going like that throughout the night, so everyone's going to get a chance. But if you do want to speak when I come out, Ian's going to have the mic up the front here. We're going to pass it down, so get ready when you want to. Don't put your hand up. You can come up and wear Magnus and the Together t-shirt is. The only thing is, don't block the camera where Jamie is. You come up in front here, just so you know what's going to happen. Huh? Yeah. So, firstly to Claire's question, which a question to Claire, which they sounded really good, these points about curiosity, about having some humility, about trying things out. But, you know, what about to your critics that would say, but we're in an emergency, right? We're in a situation where people can die. And if you get it wrong, what are the implications for that? That's an enormous set of implications. And actually, many people say things like, oh, there's, you know, Mark Twain's point, there's lies, damn lies and statistics. But surely in science, it should be right? How would you counter the point that in something as maybe potentially deadly as we were seeing at the front, at the start of this, that you can be perhaps cavalier to think people can be wrong? I mean, what would you say to that question? And then to Jade, Jade's talked about one of the things that we've seen on the campuses that have now come out to the workplaces and elsewhere. Some people call it cancel culture. It's funny, today I was just on the way up here, I was seeing that Tom Ford was making the point that he has to be conscious now about cancel culture and whatever he does in fashion. And you think, well, if it's got to fashion, has it permeated? What is the true impact of that in science? And I wonder, Jay, just to come back on that, to what extent do you really think that people saying you're not allowed to say that does affect and impact the rigour of science? And is it just an excuse, some critics might say, that your point of view is not being listened to? Is it not the case that there's a dominant view with a real strong body of scientists, and they happen to be the view, and you might be using this as an excuse to say this is why it's happening? So, Claire first, and then Jay, please.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the people who have, are in charge of the narrative and who have all the power have been wrong repeatedly. They've been horribly wrong. So everybody will be wrong. Everybody will be wrong. And what you really need to do as a politician is hear all the voices so that you can hear the breadth of where the truth might lie. Because that's actually the only way you can handle it, is to understand, that this is the range of possibilities, and then try to figure out the probability of how likely each of them are. We're terrible at predicting the future. We've seen that. It's a really, really terrible, terrible thing. I mean, I wish we were better. We all kind of needed to be better at it, but we're not good at predicting the future. Pretending we can do it is what's caused all the harm. And so I think that the only way to minimise harm in an emergency is to hear all the voices. And we've seen that happen in Texas, where it might be in Florida, where Ron DeSantis had his red team of other scientists who were just, talking to him in the background, telling him, criticising, getting so that he could hear the whole story. So he wasn't just hearing the experts who are the political players who've risen to the top of the institutions and who have their own little bubble of belief. Because if you only listen to one bubble of belief, you're going to get it wrong, and it can be catastrophic. What consequences of that are, including all the consequences we have of lockdown.
Thank you, Claire. And obviously, to make the point, everyone's made lots of mistakes. The idea that only one set of people have made mistakes is preposterous, right? Jade, please.
Thanks, Alan. So yeah, to your question about whether there is, generally a dominant view, and so dissenting voices are probably wrong anyway in science. That is true. There is generally a consensus view on things, but I think what's happened is that consensus view has not always been driven by science, and then it's just been called the science because scientists prescribe to that view, right? So a really good one that is evidence-based, and I'm sure I'll get a load of abuse for, but it's true, is the efficacy of mask wearing in the community, because all of the scientific publications up until sort of the last couple of months were based on lab studies with mannequins and machines to create droplets and so on and so forth, and aerosolized COVID. So their applicability to a mask mandate in the community is quite a stretch. And so you have to take that evidence at its value and make your claim based on that. But what happened instead was that a large community of scientists really believed that masking was the way out of this pandemic, presumably, and so pushed on mask mandates, not acknowledging their harms to many of the most vulnerable in the community, and not acknowledging the uncertainty of the evidence, which I think is what Claire was getting at, that, you can pick one of these things and say, yes, there's a scientific consensus view, but actually I'm not. If you look at the scientific research and the evidence, and you look at meta-analyses that have been done, there's minimal impact of community mask mandates on transmission. So I think that's a good example of that, where the pressure is essentially that moralizing of the argument. So it's, morally this is the correct point, so just prescribe to it so that we can all be happy and get on with our lives.
I'd be very interested to hear what the audience thinks about the idea that up until recently, perhaps politicians were clear that they were making political decisions. My personal view is that I think that politicians outsourced responsibility and hid behind scientists. Some scientists with some views, we've seen with Sage and others, and rather than take responsibility for listening, as Jade was saying, what actually happened was they outsourced it and they put some scientists in front of us, and in many ways it's now created a rod for their own back, because I think between civil servants and scientists, the ability to assert themselves, they come under a lot of pressure themselves, and I think it's a real problem. And I don't think it's just to do with COVID, by the way. I think that this has been a problem for some time, but I'd love to hear what you guys think, or anything else. So we're actually going to get Craig Lee Williams say some words now, actually, and then we're going to go down to the audience, and you can start, just a few of you can just be very careful where Jamie is with the camera. In actual fact, what you should do is come around this way, please. Come around on this side. Yeah. Come around this side, and we're going to do it from here, so you can film it here, and Ian can come here. Right, Craig.
Thanks, Alan. Cheers, Alan. That's been happening to me on stage for at least 25 years. So. It's lovely to see everybody here. It's more than lovely to me. I'm a local lad, probably can tell by my accent. Me and my family moved away to Nova Scotia in Canada in October 2019. And we went there for a quieter life, a better life if you like. Our son had a very serious operation, and he recovered, and it was, we just wanted to give him a more relaxed way of life, really. And it was beautiful, it was amazing. The kind of place where there's no shutters on the shops and people don't lock the doors. That wasn't a stereotype, or just something people say there. You ring up your car insurance and you speak to the same lady that's been doing the job for 25 years. That kind of community. Well, I was away, I was working in LA when this all started in March 2020. And like everybody else, I was kind of, shocked by it. I can't say I was surprised, but I was shocked by it. And I made it back to Canada, and generally it seemed really relaxed where we were. It was fine. And this guy appeared on the television with the Premier called Dr. Robert Strang, and who I listened to for a long time, and it seemed like the same kind of spirit of the community was apparent in local government. Well, it went from that to I got back in England 2 months ago now, or maybe a bit less. It went from that to now the vaccine passport is in every element of life in Canada, not just Nova Scotia. You can't leave the province or the country unless you're vaccinated, which is the latest thing. You've got no chance of working. You can't rent an apartment because they can ask if you're vaccinated or not. The kids can't play together unless they've got their vaccine passports. You're encouraged to inform on each other if you're not vaccinated. And they're getting into shops, everything. It's probably more missed out. You can't get on a plane, you can't get on a boat, you can't get on a bus. And it went from being idyllic to being dystopian very, very quickly. And the discrimination in society and the separating of people and the blame game was just incredible to see, because that's not what it was like when we got there. And sorry, but it's quite emotional talking about this, because it's for me to see this happen in 2021 is quite staggering, Take you with friends, you don't expect that, and the thing is that Canadians are so lovely and relaxed, and they were taken advantage of, they were lied to, and they were coerced and manipulated into doing something which they thought was for the betterment of the society. And our friends, my son's friends, my son's 5, he's just turned 5, and they got vaccinated to get back to normal, to get rid of the masks. The mandatory masks, there was no exemptions on children turn up. It's 30-degree weather, no exemptions at all. This is after Dr. Strang went on the television and told everybody that masks don't stop viruses. There's no evidence to say they do, there's actually plenty of evidence to say that they don't. And then they were mandated only a month later. And everyone took the vaccines to get back to normal, to stop the kids being locked down. We couldn't see anybody, I didn't see anyone for nearly 2 years. And then instead they got masks which are now going to be in place permanently, because they think it's a good idea to stop the common cold. The same man saying it, and they've got themselves lockdowns, passports, for at least 2025, because the Prime Minister has signed them up without any debates, without any votes, till at least 2025, those injections, whenever they say, you know, and that's unethical at best. You know, it's not on. It's not on. And the thing is that this passport is not for the betterment of society. It's at detriment. Now, I'm coming from the ethical point of view, from what I'm seeing is wrong, what's happened now in every province in Canada. But what it does to independent business, it destroys independent business. It doesn't help it. It doesn't give people confidence. People stop going to businesses because of the proof of vaccination requirements. And a lot of those businesses have gone under. Now, the problem is that, so I've got a lot to say and I'm trying to keep it brief. But the problem is that you can't function there now unless you've taken the vaccination. But the problem is that 98 people died attributed to coronavirus in Nova Scotia. 98. And this is the response. Now, that's not to negate those people's lives or how it's affected their families. But when kids can't play together,
Thank you, Craig. It's a very, very important question and point that to what extent the science and then what we do about any questions of science comes into play. Now, if you can come over here. If you want to speak or say something, ask a question or whatever, come up here, because with the mic lead's not that long and we're live streaming, and now I can't see anyone in this huge room because it's dark. But just do come on up, rather than, because you can't actually do it from there, because we need to hear you. And Ian's going to hold the mic, and then you can face that way so we can still see you on the live stream. Can you just mind not blocking that, sir? You're just in front of the live stream camera. Thank you. Right. No one got any questions or points? All right. Oh, here we go. Come up to Ian. First one, come through. Yeah.
My name's John. I've travelled from Ormskirk. I just wanted you to know that there's lots of people all over the country that feel exactly the way that you people feel here tonight. The word that stands out to me as an individual, as I listen to everyone speak here, is the word trust. I lost the trust in government. I lost the trust in their beliefs and their motivation, and I lost the trust in the institutions that we all rely upon, such as the National Health Service. And it really does concern me. I'm a former professional athlete, and my son's starting out in his career, and it terrifies me when I look at sports people where the bodies should be used to being put under duress when they're competing, but suddenly see them collapse. And I have grave concerns for the youngsters that are given these particular vaccinations. I just wanted to say that, and thank you very much for turning up. I think it's a great crowd. Thanks for together, and thanks for that.
My name's Mike. My name's Mike. A lot of you in here heard me speaking before. Yeah, just point it out. But make sure you put it up like that. You've got to look at it. So, you know, you all know, well, a lot of people in here do that. I've got cancer. I've got bowel cancer, stage 3. It should have been a lower stage, but because of the coronavirus, I was unlucky. I caught it in the March when the coronavirus came in, and it took me 7 months for diagnosis because Matt Hancock shut down all the services, the CT scanners, the MRIs. This is a very serious issue. I mean, and these doctors will know this as well, because they'll be aware of this. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the Macmillan organisation. Now, if you go to the internet and you check, they've done a 53-page report. And in that report, they say that 36,000 cancer patients could die because of late diagnosis, because that idiot Hancock shut all the hospitals down and all the services. He even built hospitals that were never used, like the Nightingale Hospital, and dismantled them after 6 or 7 months. But it was too late then, you know? I mean, I spoke to radiotherapists who told me they're just sitting there by the machines drinking coffee. Can you believe this? While people are dying with cancer. So I'm at a position now, this has gone on, it's still going on. I went to see the surgeon today. I've got to have a major operation. And because it was left for so long, you know, I'm worried about dying on the operating table, do you understand me? I mean, I'm no hero. I don't want to die. Still got a lot to offer. Do you understand me? But it's my duty as a citizen to tell people the truth. I don't care if they ignore me. Even if when I go to Christie's, I was in Christie's this morning, speaking to the surgeon, you know, speaking to the people in there. And, you know, I just tell them what's going on. And what these doctors have been saying here about the inability to speak, freedom of speech, you know, it's just getting worse. It's getting worse. And sadly, we're moving into a dystopian society. But anyway, everyone.
Mike, I'm sure everyone hopes that Mike gets through that at all. And that is when you just measure on one metric of health, you ignore the tsunami of mental health, of isolation, of cancer, of people who couldn't go to the funerals of their loved ones, who couldn't visit their neighbours or anything. It's an absolute fucking disgrace what has gone on. And what we've witnessed in the last 2 years is in broad daylight, while we've been clapping for the NHS, we've got to save the NHS. Well, the NHS is here to save us. You know, now, my sister works for the NHS, another sister's a teacher, but the one thing is, just like everything, it's been infiltrated by big pharma, by big corporations, by globalisation. I'm a capitalist by heart, I suppose, what I thought was an ethical capitalist. What you're seeing now is just a few companies that control not only the media, but the big pharma companies. And, you know, I said this in Manchester, so I'm sorry for any of you who have heard this before, but when I was 35, I got taken into hospital. I couldn't eat. I lost just a couple of stone in a week. And I ended up getting a camera down my throat. When I came out, I got given some tablets I had to take 3 times a day. A couple of days later, when I got my faculties back, I went to see my GP and said, what have I got to do not to take these 3 omeprazole tablets a day for the rest of my life? I'm 35. And they said, the GP said, well, you're overweight, you've got to lose weight, you've got to stop eating too much spicy food, and don't eat as much after 6 o'clock. All 3 things I did, and I never took them again. Now, that was because I didn't want to be a customer of Big Pharma for the rest of my fucking life. And that is the problem that we've got now. We've got a few more questions that we need now. We want to hear from you. Can you make them short, succinct, you know, to the point? And let's get a bit of a discussion here, because as we say, we hear the other side of the argument every day of the week in every advert and everything. You've only got to turn on any of the mainstream news that will say, oh, there's a few thousand people marching in London who are anti-vaxxers, and there's 1.5 fucking million people marching, right? You know, we've all got eyes, ears, and we're all of a generation as well that do remember the remnants of freedom. And, you know, I don't want to look back in 10 years' time and think, what was I doing? What was I doing there? I didn't just want to keep my mouth shut. You keep your mouth shut and you're part of this bullshit. Well then, that's wrong.
How's it going, everybody? I'll try and keep this brief. I'm from North Wales originally, from Flint, and I've been in New Zealand for the last 20 years. And I came home about 4 months ago because I had to self-exile myself from New Zealand for saying much the same as what you people think what's in your minds now. And I've been saying this for the last 2 years. I had a YouTube channel called Cross the Rubicon, which is now banned off YouTube. They froze me out completely, but I am on Telegram. But I've been saying this for years in Christchurch, in Cathedral Square, and in Auckland and Wellington, giving speeches. and now it's all come to pass. I'm home now. I've self-exiled myself, my wife and kids, split up my wife and kids in New Zealand. New Zealand government completely cancelled me, cancelled my bank account, got me sacked from my job, everything. I was like the Tommy Robinson, if you like, of New Zealand, and that's why I'm home. So it's not just Canada, it's not just here, it's not Australia, it's everywhere, and all these leaders are colluding with a very small group of globalists, and we know the names, we all know who they are. And it's them people who are the fat controllers of the world. They get the red carpet treatment every time they land in a country, and it's them who are paying and corrupting our leaders to destroy their own nations.
One point or question. Let's get through a few more and go back to the speakers.
Hello, my name is Karina. I haven't really stood out here before, anywhere. But I just wanted to know why the government think that they have the power over us when actually we vote them into service. So they're supposed to serve us. And then we've got loads of rights. We've got the Nuremberg Code. We have our unalienable rights. And in the unalienable rights, we have a right to go out and work. We have a right to speak. We have a right to travel. Why are all these rights being overridden and trodden on and leaving us defenceless?
Hi everyone, my name's Georgie. You okay? Oh, I feel so nervous, but I was asked to get up and speak actually after this event, and I said I would, and then I've had a week from hell and thought, no, I can't. And then I'm sitting at the back and I see my friends at the top and I think, do you know what, I'm going to get up and speak. The reason why am I here tonight, I'm here because I oppose the implementation of vaccine passports. Why do I oppose vaccine passports? Because I don't want the vaccine. And like hell are they ever going to get near my kids with that vaccine? Why don't I want the vaccine? Because statistics show that my body has a natural immunity recovery rate of 99.7%. And my kids' recovery rate is 99.9999999%. Why the hell would I ever let anybody put anything, experimental gene therapy, and me and my kids, using my kids as guinea pigs, while this thing is still on trial till 2023?
I'm Julie, I'm a senior health professional working at one of the biggest hospitals on the world, the biggest. How long they'll have my job for, I do not know. I'm having to do video clinics because I refuse to wear a mask or be vaccinated. I've been very vocal on social media to the point where I've been called in by my trust and, challenged, and I gave them a whole load of science and they didn't like it, but they hadn't understood it. I want to say to everybody, I've trusted the NHS, I've given them a load of I'm actually educated to Master of Science level, and I'm not saying that to brag, I'm just saying I understand the science. The majority of people don't, and it's not your fault. You've not been trained in research or scientific methods, and you don't understand medicine or pharmacology, so you do trust experts, whoever they are, and that's why people are extremely vulnerable to being lied to. And I'm now standing here publicly and saying, and I don't care if I lose my job, I'm standing here saying I've lost trust in the NHS, I've lost trust in the governments of the world, and if you think this is not intentional, you're highly mistaken. One more point before I go. And let me tell you, I challenged my doctor and nurse colleagues and I said, shame on you. You're telling the public this is safe. This goes against all our training. There's no safety data. There's no retrospective studies. This is a population trial and you are practicing on people and you won't know the outcome for years. And now they're trying to mandate it. Stand up for your children and your grandchildren.
My name's Colin David Colin McGuinness. So it's a lawful thing. I'm here to give you positive to what's happened. Chester, there's a ring round Chester, and the issue Crystal School and all the others, one kid has been vaccinated. Everyone else, totally no vaccinations. We've got an ex-CID training everyone to be common law police, and we've got someone there training everyone to. We've also got people wanting to UCC-108 standing. They've allied with the 25 cat barons, and they've issued Article 61.
How do we get in contact with you?
Go to 10 o'clock Sunday morning, Chester standing, the little auditorium above the boathouse. There's loads there. It's a centre. It's they walked into Chester court and took over it, stopped it, they issued an arrest for the head chief. The warranting chief had to come down. The police even took some of the notaries and they took them to the schools to serve for themselves. Well, there's just one little thing.
One last thing.
Little bit of homework for you all, and this is amazing. When you stand in front of your road, look at your road sign and ask yourself why you've never ever realised it's written in all capitals. That all capitals is the language of the Law Society. That's their code. That's why you have your number plates in all capitals.
Okay, so I'm fighting a big battle with social services. My children have been abused since 2013. Everybody knows about it, pleasing everyone. Now, my children are in social services care, and I can't get an answer to why my children, if my children's getting a vaccine or not. So I don't know if my children are safe right now. No one's giving me answers. I literally went to my MP the other week, and my MP, Mick Whitley of Birkenhead, got me arrested. Now he wants me in court on the 14th. Now, I've been doing a bit of digging. I've been down to London with the 5th of November. I was on the front line with the riot. If anyone hasn't seen it, go and type in YouTube, London protests. Anyway, it was on the front line. The Sun have edited out me saying that Harriet Harman is the problem, and basically paedophile information exchange. Now, she's on the Human Rights Council. We're wondering why we haven't got our human rights. Now, Mick Whitley, the MP of Birkenhead, has sat on the council for Unite the Union with Jack Dromey, Harriet Harman's husband. So I'm looking at going to jail. I'm looking at being another Melanie Shaw on the 14th. I've pulled a protest outside the Birkenhead Magistrates Court on the 13th at 11 a.m. And I'm going to absolutely tear the place down. If they have to go through my door, they have to go through my door. But I'm concerned about my children and this vaccine right now.
So, obviously, a lot of very big, important questions have come up. We're going to come back to the speakers. There's a couple of points that have been made here that, I mean, take whatever you want to respond to. But on the day that Sajid Javid is saying that 70,000 care workers have to be mandatory vaccinated or they will lose their jobs, when, you know, we're talking about it's for your health. And another 100,000 or so NHS workers are being threatened.
Not until April.
Yeah, well, they're being threatened now and then saying it's going to be April. The question of health and science and engaging the public, trying to win hearts and minds as opposed to blunt tools like mandatory impositions or big nudges and threats like vaccine passports. How much damage do you think that does to science as well? Because I think trust is an enormous part that's come up, and I'm wondering what you guys, but you can take any of the other points. Let's take this time, Claire, we'll go the other way around this time. Jade, you go first, and then Claire, please. Jade.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I like your question about the damage it does. I think that I've been in positions before. I've had mandatory vaccines. So when I was in the police, I had to have the hepatitis vaccine, but I knew that when I started, and so I was, consenting to do that as part of the role. But that's different in a lot of ways, which we won't go into. But I think the key thing here is that there's this temptation, because of the sort of crisis mode that we've been in, and the way that the laws have been changed in that lens of crisis, to just be like, don't worry about it, we'll just get through this and then it'll be fine. Don't worry about it, we'll just do this and get through this and it'll be fine. And it's like a justification, or we just need to get through this and then it'll be fine. And there is no long-term view of the damage that's being done, apart from, well, none in government anyway. And we know that certain groups who tend to already be discriminated against in society are less likely to have the vaccine. And so you're going to end up with a situation where if you're making vaccines mandatory for certain roles, or using vaccine passports, I think it has the same effect, where you're further stigmatizing some groups, excluding people from society. And there is all that argument, but I think the most important thing is when the next virus comes around that has a much higher fatality rate, what are we going to do when we've alienated millions of people with these kind of measures? And I think we know good public health evidence is very clear that coercion and mandatory measures for these sorts of things are detrimental. That is the sort of, to go back to what we were saying before, the evidence so far is that is not a great idea. And I haven't spoken to anyone who has changed their mind, you know, who was already hesitant and has gone, do you know what, if they're going to make it mandatory, I think it's a good idea now, I'll change my mind.
Thank you. And Claire, I mean, a few points have been made here, but about the collateral damages, the damages to other kinds of health, heart disease, stroke, cancer, and a range of others. When we're discussing this in the context, have you some reflections on that as well, and also the issue of children, with the JCVI's advice, and then what the CMOs have done, but you can take anything, but there's a lot there. Go on, Claire, thank you.
In terms of children and young people, the evidence for vaccination does not stack up. And you know, we've had situations before where we've introduced vaccines in an emergency. We did it with swine flu in 2009, and it was problematic. And people wrote huge documents afterwards. They had these reports and they had reviews, and they said, "Let's never let this happen again." Pharma, you know, managed to manipulate us, and it was all really harmful, and there was no benefit from it. I think in terms of healthcare generally, we've been sold this kind of lie that all the stuff we've done has prevented death. It didn't prevent any death. It really didn't prevent any deaths, and we know that from Sweden. I know people hate using this Sweden example, but what people forget about the Sweden example is not that we're comparing it to Norway and Finland. Sweden was meant to be the place where it went astronomically exponential and it was a complete disaster, and that did not happen, and it has not happened anywhere. Everywhere has seen really similar size waves every time, because nothing that anyone's done has made any difference to it. And it's really, really difficult to accept that, you know, we do have this new virus, and actually it's like a bad flu. It's not like average flu. It's a bad flu. It does kill more people than your average flu. But there's nothing we can do about it if it's a virus that's going to find the susceptible members of the population, because that's just one of the sort of awful parts about life. So when people have then done policies which have meant that other people's lives have been put at risk, there was no justification for that at all. There was just none. And I think there was a point very, very early on when, you know, there were more unknowns, and you can sort of have a bit more flexibility about what's right or what's wrong. But actually, we know what we're dealing with. We've known for a long time what we're dealing with, and the fact they're still messing around with the rest of healthcare is ridiculous. And I don't think we're going to get back to a safe situation until we've got visitors back in hospital. Because while visitors aren't allowed in hospital, people are too scared to go in when they've got an emergency. And we've got massive excess deaths at home, and a substantial number of those are from people who've got heart disease, who needed to get to hospital, and actually diabetics as well, who needed to get to hospital, and they're not accessing healthcare. And it's not entirely the NHS's fault. That's also part, well, I mean, it is because they're not even visited it, right? But I mean, there is partly people's own decision making about when they need to access it. So you kind of have to take some responsibility and just go when you need to go, otherwise lives are going to be at risk. And I just wanted to say one more thing about how we get out of this situation. So the obvious answer, you know, this is political, the solution needs to be political, but we don't have the structures or the time we need a party that would be on our side, that we could all kind of come behind. And, maybe we can do these selections, maybe we can form a party, we can make it happen, but, it's a really long time frame for that to happen. We don't have judges on our side. The idea that our rights have been infringed upon means that we ought to be able to take them to court and sort it through that. But when people have gone to court here and elsewhere in the world, judges have not been on our side by and large. And that is because they are scared. They are often, grey-haired, and they've been scared and they've not yet calmed down. And the thing about scaring people is you can't do it forever. It lasts about 18 months. And we've sort of had that now. So people are starting to come out of their fear, and they need help coming out of their fear. And I think all of us have a really important role to play in the real world, talking to friends and family and trying to get them on side. And it's really, really difficult. I mean, I've struggled myself with this with my own friends and family. I know how difficult it is, because what we do is we clash, and we just end up sort of telling each other our different sort of opinions without actually making progress. And the Heart Group, which I'm co-chair of, which is trying to produce the scientific evidence in a calm and rational way, in a way that people can understand, we're going to start trying to work with a group called Reaching People. They've got a website, reachingpeople.net, who are brilliant at how you communicate, how you find common ground with somebody, how you expose the areas that they're not sure about and then help fill in the gaps and build up bit by bit by bit. And it's a skill that I'm absolutely still learning. But I really think that everybody in this room can help make a difference, because it's not until we've educated people that we're going to turn this around.
Okay, thank you, Claire. We're going to bring Craig in just a second. We've got a few people here, and then after that, we're going to wrap it up for the live stream. We're going to stay here and talk and engage and interact. One of the things that's very concerning for me is I've never been much good at maths or at science. And, we have to make our choices and decisions, but the idea that we make our personal choices and then there's this accusatory climate where people start calling you names, or you can't then start participating in society, whether that's to do with vaccine passports or any other things, seems to be a real huge challenge for us. And the idea that we start demonizing people, and that's all round, right? That's whether you call people COVIDiots or if people start calling people sheeple. One of the important things about what we're doing tonight is we're taking everyone seriously, we're engaging. We might not all agree. I won't agree with all of the things people are saying here, but if you believe in freedom and the ideas of choice, and being able to have control over your own body and not being coerced into things, it doesn't really matter in some ways what you think about other things, right? We have unity around those ideas. And those ideas, just having Remembrance Day just gone, the people fought and died for, we're the custodians of, it seems to me. So these things have very, very huge ramifications for everyone. So now Craig's going to do a couple of minutes, come back because he didn't finish off before. Then we're going to come out to these guys here and then back to the panellists. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I didn't want to leave it on that note, really. I just want to say a few personal observations. And we stand on the coast just down there, we can see North Wales. You can see it with the naked eye. It's just there. Well, vaccine passports now come into hospitality as of yesterday. That's how close it is. Now, I will spend my life going against this, what's happening. For my son, and for his friends, and for the children in Canada, which haven't got the choice. And I concur with the lady who works for the NHS, for goodness sake. But that's what we all must do. Like Alan said, we might not agree on everything, but that's what we're faced with, and we must not accept that in our society. And there's so many people here, to sit in this room now without a mask on, or to even get in without a vaccine passport, is what my mates in Nova Scotia can't do. And they may never be able to do that again until they stand up and they reclaim that for themselves, And that's the thing. The more vaccinations went out, it should have saved the day. That should have been it. But it got worse and worse and worse. More restrictions came in, and surely it should be the other way around. Left or right, all that doesn't matter. It's a Liberal province for 17 years. They voted that Premier out because they didn't want the Scotia Pass. The Conservative Premier put it straight back in a week later. My uncle said, all we need now, Craig, is Charlton Heston to ride over the hill. And I said, no, David. I said, because no one's going to ride over the hill. We've got to do it ourselves. We've got to save ourselves and stand up for it. And one thing I want to say before I wrap up, right, is this, okay? It's my pleasure and a privilege to sit here with these people because they were a beacon of light in lonely Nova Scotia when me and my wife and my son could see what was happening. And we're not crazy, you know. We done our bit and whatever. But the thing is, these people here, if there was people like that in Canada doing that, it wouldn't have happened the way it did, in my opinion. And it's a pleasure to sit here with what Dan's doing, what Anne's doing, what the doctors are doing. And I just want to leave it on this, right? Because Dan asked me to say this because we had it on a phone conversation the other day. The future isn't written, okay? That's it. It's not written yet. And it's down to us to make the decisions and to make the changes. Thank you for listening.
Right, now we're gonna go through. We've got a certain amount of time, so at the end where that guy is, that's going to be it. So I'm going to ask you to come through and try and be quite fast because we've got a certain time limit. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Roger. I'll keep it quite brief. I'm a southerner, as most of you get from my accent, but I've come up here and made it my home because I worked in Whitehall with DEFRA, with ministers, trying to make the world a better place and help people. They weren't interested. I'm not joking. Like, so the Badger Call, for instance, there was a hundreds of page report. Only 2 lines said that in some instances, that TB might be passed on by badgers. 2 sentences in a 400, 500 page report. So they basically do twist everything to suit the narrative.
I'd like to share some information on masks. The size of the coronavirus particle is about 100 nanometers. Your surgical blue mask is the gaps in that mask are 1,000 times bigger than the size of the virus. So you can work out this is not stopping the virus, but I want you to think about what the NHS is spending on masks. They're supposed to be changed every 2 hourly. I'm sure we can all think of better ways to spend the money.
Hi, my name is Katie, and I'm from the United States of America. Thank you. I got a cheer for that. I'm from the American South in a state called North Carolina, and I wanted to ask a question specifically about a state called Florida. So Governor Ron DeSantis has been advocating for different forms of not only medicinal treatments, but life-saving antibody treatments and things like that that are being blocked by the President of the United States. Where is the conversation that... let's go, Brandon, all right?
My name's Dorian, I'm 20, soon to be 21, and I just want to take the quick time to mention a particular group of people who died for our freedoms, who died for our ability to be here today, unmasked, unsocially distanced. The soldiers that we remember today on this special day, Armistice Day.
He won't give me the mic because I've got that much to say, got my instructions. In a short time, we've got to get out the beast system, get your kids out the schools. They're the most dangerous place. All the vaccines. Mike's got cancer. They've been poisoning us. We've been vaccinating us, giving us poisons for years. Get them out. Stop them vaccinating your kids. The same World Health Organization who's giving you the vaccines want to sexualize your children in the school. It's a broken system. It's the beast. This is...
Hi everyone, I'm just a normal person, Donna. Yeah, well, not normal, but you know. Anyway, I just wanted to know if anyone could give me a show of hands, right? I've refused the vaccination that many times because I have heart condition because I've been stage 4 breast cancer. Yeah. Now, because I won't have it, I've actually had somebody from the NHS ring me up and ask me why I'm refusing it. Have you? Yeah, because I am the only person. Have you? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just wondering what all that's about.
Come see me. I've got the remedy for you.
I'm dead nervous to speak and I had to walk out of uni because I couldn't public speak. Well, I work for the NHS and I just want to let you know that people are dying of the vaccine. I've already had a written warning in work. I don't know if I'm going to have a job come April. Oh, my heart's coming on my chest, sorry. Yeah, like, I don't know if I'm going to have a job come April, but there's no chance in hell seeing the adverse side effects of what I've seen. I've got nurses who are colleagues telling me that people are coming in with myocarditis. 32-year-old my age is going to die. So just stand your grounds and say no.
Right, I'm going to go a little bit off topic. I mean, I'm sorry about this, but right, I've written a few things down, so. Right, so, yeah, it's just one, but I've just written it down. It's only short. So, as we are here to talk about many things, there is one thing that has not been addressed. The good doctor here has said, yes, there is a new virus. But with all due respect, I'd like to ask, please, if I may, is there a new virus? Has it truly been isolated, or is it just another computer model? We need to rewind back to this very issue.
Well said.
Before we can, if we can go back to that issue, all this will just fall to pieces.
Hi, my name's Mark. I also work for the NHS. Sorry. So, key thing what came up today, I think, was trust, and I just wanted to make a point about it. Can everyone just look at someone who you don't know sitting next to you for 1 minute? Come on, just take a look at them. How does that feel? Makes you feel a bit nervous. We've lost the trust between each other, and as long as we're dependent on the Queen for that money that is trust between us, then we're in that slave system, like the man said over there. So what we need to do is start swapping and trading between each other without involving the Queen. No tax, no money. Let's take it back. Before you leave today, take one person's number and then text and tell them what you can do for them, and then they'll do something for you. And let's do that, and that'll show an example for everyone else.
Yeah. Thank you. So, I'm conscious that, we're going to all stay here and carry on talking. The live stream's a certain amount of time. I'm going to come back to the panel, and then we're going to wrap up. But obviously people can stay, should stay, talk, discuss. We definitely want everyone to sign the togetherdeclaration.org. Also, Dan's an ambassador in the region, and we'd love you to be involved. I disagree with some of you. We're going to argue and discuss as adults. That's what we do, right? We don't start calling people names and shutting them down and taking them off with big tech or anything like that. That's never a way to get a clarification of ideas. Just, if you can, there's a load of things that have come up. But if you can, in terms of this discussion and where we're going, could you give some reflections just on like your concluding thoughts on the subject, and also how we can come out of this in terms of like engagement with the public, free speech and science, and where you see this going? Jade and then Claire, please.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that some of the questions that we're getting really shows the problem that we're facing in terms of the lack of trust. I've heard some really emotional questions there and confused ones as well, and it just shows the problem that we're already facing. This is not a future threat, it's a now threat. People are feeling very mistrustful of authority, and that's not a good thing. It shouldn't be that way, but obviously I'm speaking from a science research sort of academia perspective and universities where, you know, you might not think it applies to you, but actually that's where all of this research and science comes from, or the vast majority of it in the UK. So I think I just want to say that I'll start by saying something hopeful. I think Twitter and places like that exacerbate the problem in our minds. And actually, if you sit down and speak to people in the pub, a lot of the time they are very happy to debate these things with you or discuss them and disagree nicely. Twitter is not real life and it's not real academia either. So I think there's hope in that because there is free debate happening. It hasn't disappeared. But what I would like to say for the future, sort of conclusion, just for 1 minute, is that I think everyone in the room would agree that for students, not hearing other arguments aside from the ones you believe in doesn't create you a safe space, because it's kind of akin to hiding your child at home until they're 18 so they don't catch any bugs or viruses, and then when they're finally let outside, those insults to their immune system are so much more severe. And so similarly for our graduates, many of them won't be able to tolerate debate, they won't be able to respect other people's views or even make friends with people who don't think in exactly the same way as they do. So I think we owe it to society and to our students at universities, because how can this situation as it is be helpful to graduates' prospects and their quality of life? And how can continuing a system of scientific inquiry on a backdrop of silencing some forms of debate be acceptable to us as a society? So my ask is that many researchers, as in the example of clinical trials, but also other fields, conduct their research with an explicit understanding and an effort to overcome factors which could bias their work and conclusions. And I think it's high time that this was considered seriously in all forms of scientific research. So people just need to be made aware that their beliefs about the world will not only shape the conclusions they come to, but will also shape the scientific questions they choose to ask in the first place. So if we don't act now, I'm worried that we're in danger of losing important streams of research entirely.
Thank you very much. Can we hear it for Dr. Jade Norris, please? Claire. Can't hear you.
Let me just answer that question about the virus first. So the virus has got, the genetic code that goes with it. The people who've been sick, you can find that genetic code in them. So there is definitely something there that, we've sequenced hundreds of thousands of these genomes of this virus. Now, the bit that people talk about on the internet all the time is no one's isolated the virus. And that is a kind of slightly skewed question because that's something you do with bacteria more than with viruses. But what you can do with viruses is you get cells in a culture, so you have loads and loads of laboratory cells. You put the virus on there, and if it gets into the cell, replicates, and then explodes the cell, then you know you've got an infected virus. Now, this one doesn't actually do that. What this one does is it gets into the cell, it replicates, and then it buds off these little buds at the top of the cell, which are just like virus particles. But that's what you see with influenza as well. So if this isn't a virus, then influenza isn't a virus. So, I think we've got the evidence that this is an infectious virus, but it probably behaves more like influenza than like other viruses. And actually there's quite a lot of sort of stuff to learn about in terms of it being more like influenza than other viruses, in terms of it coming and going in waves and not everyone being susceptible. I have noticed, and there's quite a lot of you that spoke out today who are working in the NHS. And I do hope that more and more people in that position feel the courage to be able to speak out. And I think that with the threat hanging over people of April and in the lead up to that, I think that should empower people to feel that they actually don't have that much to lose anymore, and that it's worth them speaking out. Because we have to break the illusion of consensus. That's the situation we've got. Emperor's new clothes. And a lot of people who don't realise that there is another story out there. They just haven't heard it at all. They're just going along with it because everyone's going along with it. So, they have never questioned any of it. And it's the illusion of consensus in the medical community and the scientific community that we have to break. And that can only happen with people speaking out. So I would encourage you to be brave about it.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I'm under pressure. Dan's going to speak, then Craig, then I'm going to say a few things and we're going to wrap up.
Sorry, I just feel that I'm going to come back with something because I don't know if it was just me, but it sounded like I was getting a bit patronised before about like, yeah, you wouldn't understand if you went to university. University doesn't always generate the best results. I'll give you an example in the alcohol trade. We have the Sheffield model of alcohol-related admissions, which is basically an equation of if you've gone in and you've been bonneted by a car but you happen to have one glass of wine a month, a percentage of your admission will be related to alcohol. Now, let's look what else comes out of universities. Well, how about Cambridge Analytics? Now, the point is, universities, are there, and they do a brilliant job, but also the general public also has eyes and ears, and we have a brain, and there's a massive amount of lobbyists and sponsors and things that go into university research, and all sorts of modelling that's done based and backed by big pharma and some of the big banks and corporates. So I don't, just because somebody's got a big hat on or a badge or letters behind the name, don't always take it, that they're right.
Thanks, Dan. I would also put in something that's not been mentioned this evening, because I happen to think that many of the staff, the frontline workers of the NHS, are doing a remarkable job. One of the issues that no one's talked about, people talk about big pharma quite a lot, is the role that the public sector unions have played, both in hospitals but also in education. I think there's been an abdication of responsibility when it comes to our children in schools. That's by some of the leaders of the public sector, not by the actual rank and file of ordinary workers that have gone lockstep with actually trying to push for more restrictions and more impositions. And I think that question needs to be addressed as well and asked why it is, because often they speak in the name of ordinary staff, frontline workers. But as we're seeing across America now with municipal workers, police, fire workers, all the first responders that are saying they're not going to accept no jab, no job, and they're actually coming out and challenging it, that it's an absolute hypocrisy and very, very wrong to say that people who are actually saving lives are actually risking people's health. And it's an insult to say they have to have it imposed on them. If you can't win hearts and minds, that's a big challenge, and we're going down a very dangerous road. But Craig?
Thanks, Alan. I just want to say something about the vaccine itself. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. All I know is that it's very clear to me, and it's evidenced, I'm sure a lot of people in this room, that it is doing harm to people. It may do some good, I don't know, but all I know is that it is doing harm to people. There are more people in Merseyside than there are in Nova Scotia, and it's the size of England. And the only time 30-year-olds went into hospital was when it was from the adverse reactions. And it got to the point that it was so many people that the government had to release a statement which said, with informed consent, we're telling you that, in some very rare cases, one 30-year-old actually said, I'm not telling people not to get vaccinated, I'm just saying that 6 lads my age came in the same evening. And because it's such a small community, people knew each other. So people know that it was happening. Yet the government say, so your kids, we're going to do your kids now, and your kids can't play together in sports, and you can't go in anywhere, or your kids have got to have, who can't yet be vaccinated, have got to have a test, a weekly test to go into the community, right? The governments are therefore saying, there is a risk to this, right? But if you don't take the jabs, then you can't live or exist in our society. Oh, by the way, you can't leave the province or the country. We must not find ourselves in that position here. We must not allow that for our kids, because where there is risk, there must be choice. It's as simple as that.
So I want to thank our speakers, everyone. Just say it's been really, really great to have you present to us and talk with us and engage with us I also want to say, just before I give over to Dan to wrap it all up, that really what we've seen tonight is that we need much more of this, not less. We need much more rigorous public debate, discussion. We need to argue about things we don't agree with. There are many things that we may not agree with and I would argue with. I mean, I happen to think that the big tragedy now is a situation where, and it wasn't just happening with the response to COVID, but it was before that, around the whole area of trust with people, trust of ordinary people. Like when people say, you're all asleep or you're stupid, we have to convince one another. Otherwise, it's fatalism. Otherwise, we're also saying that people are stupid, like the government seems to think people are when they treat us with contempt and disdain. We together, we the people, have all the power. They can't keep imposing things on us. If we choose to say enough is enough, we're not going to have it. Whether it's to do with vaccine passports or mandations or mass testing continually or closing schools or nudging us, the buck stops with us, but we have to take a stand. And the way we do that is with things like this, and to organise locally and have our voices heard. Let our members of parliament here go to them, go to the surgery, say, we're going to vote depending on what you do. Campaign, organise, let's get leaflets together. Please, everyone sign the togetherdeclaration.org. Get involved locally with New Brighton, with Dan, Craig and other people like you're doing. And across the country, for everyone that's watching this on the live stream, let's make this happen properly. Let's have our voices be heard. Let's make the 123,000 go up to 500,000 and then 1 million. Let's keep their feet to the fire. The only way this is going to change is when we say it's going to change. The second that does, it finishes. On that note, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that's helped out here. Jamie on the streaming, Magnus, Ian. If people want to, you can have a little, we have a little contribution thing that will go round. No, you don't have to, but if you want to contribute towards togetherdeclaration.org, you can. And now I'm going to hand over to Mr. Dan Davis, and I want to show you a big round of applause for him. Gratitude. Thank you very much.
Hi guys. Right. Thank you.
I was with the protesters with the no job for job. The protesters made mention of the thought that the people.
Okay, could we get this on a bit? Okay. Guys, thanks very much for coming tonight and also waiting so patiently. And you know, it's amazing to see a group of people like this just listening to an alternative point of view that you don't see every day on the main news channels. New Brighton, we're in New Brighton at the moment, Rock Point as it used to be called, and it was founded in 1830 by a guy called James Atherton, who looked over 170 acres of sand dunes called Rock Point. And James Atherton came over, bought them, went down to Brighton on the south coast and decided to form New Brighton of the north. And 3.5 years ago, we started trying to turn this place around. And you know, New Brighton, before it was called Rock Point, it was called Devil's Nest. And there's always been a garrison in Isle of Man that used to actually look out because there's a bunch of pirates and buccaneers and things that lived here. So we've always sort of stood up to our you know, sort of rights and things, and also questioned the state. And you know, the current administration we have in at the moment is, you know, in broad daylight just robbing us blind. And while they throw a few pence to the NHS and things like that. So, just to wrap up, thanks to Al, as always. It's been Alan is an absolute legend. He's on this 24 hours a day. Craig, who I didn't even know until a few months ago, you know, he's come over, and what a guy. Thanks to all the team, thanks to Jamie, who's been, you know, he's never been paid, he just streams everything, he's told the journey of New Brighton. And where's the Cockney ginger white boy? Where is he? Wayne. Oh, there he is. Wayne's been in that. Wayne's from New Brighton. And in 1991, when I started CPL, he went down to London, he was behind like a lot of the you know, the resurrection of like Brick Lane and Shoreditch and stuff like that. And as I was sat in a supermarket, a purpose-built quick save that's been shut derelict. And places like this are written off. And by governments who don't give a shit. What this is about as well is just standing up to that, when you get bought off, when the media get bought off, when we get spoon-fed this crap, like we're all dickheads. We're not. And we've got our own brain, and we've got our own eyes and ears, and we can see exactly what's going on here. So thanks for coming along. If you want to have a drink, we didn't get a license tonight, because conveniently the council couldn't give it to us. So, oh, by the way, in 3.5 years, we spent £7.5 million on this road. And this is people, neighbours, mates, mates from London, people like that. And, the council has contributed exactly 4 bins and the introduction of car parking charges. So we'll have a spunking money up the wall everywhere else. So it's an absolute disgrace. Yeah, what I'd say is you could support us. We've the second lockdown, after getting all the staff from the Rock Point Records, Oakland, Habibi, James Averton together and tell them that for the second time, because of course the first time was shut for 3.5 weeks to flatten the curve. Yeah, right. Well, the second lockdown, when I got them all together and said, listen guys, we're shut again. And I don't know when we're going to be open, and there was tears, and also just what keeps you going here is just people just walking in and just saying, thanks for doing this, thanks to you and your team for doing this. Old dears that walk in, people of all different ages who walk in, like one the other day, and just looked at my no vaccine passport above Rock Point Records and went, I burst out crying. I just came in. And we say, you're not alone. You're not alone, you're not going mad. And the amount of people that have just been wandering around going, am I going crazy here? Getting spoon-fed this complete crap from them. Well, you're not going mad. And in our places, the doors are open. We're open for all. And together, we stand. So, if you want to go for a drink, James Averton, aka the Three Bellends, or Rock Point Records. We've got a brilliant bunch of brothers and sisters who will make you all feel welcome. But thank you for coming down, and thank you for supporting not only together, but New Brighton as well. Thanks so much.
No, you're alright, good boss.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's not a problem. Let me just.
You've seen them?
I have some of the YouTubers I know use them.
All the vloggers use them.
Oh, okay.